You're on.
Carol Vaughn. My mother was Liddy Ackermann, and we say Ackermann. Some people say Ackermann. And these are some cream cheese bars, and there's wonderful desserts here. Good company, lots of good food, and
yeah, I know. But at least the pay.
It started out, we were only 40-some million, 60 million when I went on the board. So you learn a lot about operations when it's small.
All this, Jack remembers the family of Jenny and Arthur Ackerman. Ackerman, anyway.
Ackerman around here. Ackerman here.
So one day I said to my mother, Nori, I said, I've gone to Europe and they don't say Ackerman, they say Ackerman. Jenny Ackerman. And Nori says to me, what? No, not Ackerman, it's Ackerman. So I say, look, Mom, your dad's a German, right? In Germany, they say Ackerman. Mom says, no. I say, why not? She says, that sounds too Dutchy. So I hope you all feel free to interrupt me as I'm telling what stories I have to remember and correct my memories, or you can add any stories of your own as you go along, as long as you talk loud enough, okay? So I used to enjoy going to Spud's farm, and in my earliest memories, the Mylinks girls were there putting doll clothes on the cats. And later on, I can remember a wedding on the farm in the front yard.
Yep.
But I never can remember if it was Ruth or Carol who was getting married. But there's one thing I'll never forget. Just about the time the groom was supposed to be saying, I do, all I could hear is moo, moo, moo.
Very true.
Yeah, and then Spud said he put the hay just outside the fence, and he was going to throw the hay over the fence just before the ceremony, but he forgot. So the cows making moo moo all through the ceremony. Now, the most amazing thing I learned about the Mylinks was only about 5 years ago. I learned that Lyd was a saint. Now, that's really true. Lyd really was a saint, and you know we Protestants don't have a whole lot of saints. You might be surprised to learn this, but I got it from an impeccable source, our dear Aunt Ev. Even in her last days at Pine Haven, I never dared talk to Ev about politics or current events, because she always knew more about it than I did. She was the most informed and authoritative voice in our clan. So I said to Ev, how do you know that Ev was a saint? Well, she explained it to me. Many years ago, her sister Lyd got a new dress. And there wasn't a whole lot of money in the Ackerman family, as you all know, and so a new dress didn't arrive there very often. Well, after a while, Aunt Ev asked if she could wear Lyd's new dress, and of course Lyd said, you can wear the new dress. And then Ev made a terrible mistake. You going to finish the story for me?
No, you're doing just great.
Ev made a terrible mistake. She went for a bicycle ride wearing Lyd's new dress. And the dress was completely ruined. Ev was so horrified that I could tell that 75 years later she didn't fully recover from this experience. But dear Aunt Lyd did not have one word of reproach. In fact, she did everything she could to calm and relieve Aunt Ev.
Now, Julie says she never heard that story.
Well, it happened before you were born, I guess. But Phyllis says that's a true story.
That's right.
Make it
That's
up.
good, yeah.
Yes.
So Ev and my mother Nori were in Pine Haven together, and Uni would come to visit. And on my summer vacations, I would come and I would drive them here to the cottage. So, and they would like to have, what did you eat up at the Belgium there? Belgium waffles in Belgium. So on the way back from Belgium, we would drive past the farm. The original farm, and I never quite knew where that was, and there's probably other people here who don't know exactly where it is, but you start from Cedar Grove and you go south past the Amsterdam Road about a half a mile. There's a auto repair place on the right, and just across the road is the original farm. The house and the barn are on the side of a hill. And you look at it, and then off to the right is a little shack, which is a chicken coop, I guess. And that is the place my mother was born.
In the chicken coop?
Yeah. That wasn't a chicken coop then. The house was built after my mother was born. And I still remember Grandma telling this story, that on one fearfully cold winter night, she held one sick child all night long, halfway inside the oven. That's a story I heard with my own ears. And somebody later on said that was probably Lid. So you guys can tell these stories better than I can, but somebody had to tell them, huh?
You're doing fine.
They've been lost way back in our mind. You're just bringing them out.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll fix it. If I goof it up, I'll fix it up. You just have to.
How much did Lid weigh? She was a real preemie?
Yeah, she
Yes.
was just a couple of pounds.
Just a couple pounds.
And she said they opened the oven door and they put her in a little, was it a shoebox or something?
Yeah.
And put her on the door of the oven to keep her warm. Where they took care of preemies.
I know what we used to do.
The ladies of the neighborhood ladies said they were going to get that one big. We never make it.
So Nori and Helen were about the same age, and they played a lot together. They played in the barn, and they liked to run around outdoors in their bare feet. Now, you might not believe what I'm going to tell you next, but Nori told me that she and Helen had a lot of fun stepping in cow pies. The squishy ones, she said, were nice and warm. Does anybody believe it or don't believe it? I don't know. She told me.
I never
What can I
heard
say? My mom went through a time machine. She stopped calling me Jack and she started calling me Pa. Yesterday she called me Louie. So we were at Pine Haven and a friendly dog, it was a little bit too friendly, came up to us and Nori says, "Behave, Selfie. Behave, Selfie. There's girls in the house." So I thought, is that Louie talking or is that Jenny talking? I don't know. I heard "behave, Selfie" all the time. And raise your hand if you've heard it before.
Is that Grandma would say?
Yourself.
Behave selfie?
Behave, Selfie. So not too many.
Selfie, but she would say self.
Oh yeah, behave self.
Behave self.
Behave self.
Behave self.
Mom would say selfie, behave selfie. And I pass that on to my son and to Dixie Allison. And that goes on.
So the front of the Ackermann barn, Ackermann? What am I going to say? So the front of the Ackermann barn is at the level of the highway. And the back side of the barn is one story up in the air. And there was pretty often some competition between Louie and Ev. Louie never had a brother that he could wrestle with, or tussle with, but Ev seemed like she was about willing to fulfill the role of a brother. At least that's the way it sounded to me. So Ev wanted to learn how to drive a car, but Louie wouldn't teach her. But Ev was no dummy. She just watched closely what Louie did when he drove a car. She told me this. After a while, Ev figured she could drive a car too. So the unforgettable day finally came when Ev drove the car off the road, across the barnyard, into the barn, and very nearly out the other side. This would have been a one-story drop to the ground. I can't imagine what it's like to be the only boy in a house of 5 girls. But Louie knew this and he kind of relished the part, I think. I remember Louie at his house in Cedar Grove, he'd say something like, hold this a second, he'd say, "What the Dixie? I'm not fat. This is my chest falling down."
Yeah. What the Dixie.
So Louie took the train to Denver to see his son Carl in the military. When Louie got on the train, he discovered there was darkies on there and he just had to sit down with them and talk to them. Now the word darkies is no longer considered a polite word, though it was polite at that time in my memory. Anyway, nowadays we're supposed to say Afro-Americans. Anyway, when Louie got home, he just had to tell us all of his adventures. Everything what he said and everything what they'd said. Then he'd show us how white their teeth were and then we'd all be laughing. The truth is that we all stood in awe of Louie because the rest of us were too timid.
He would talk to anybody.
Yeah, and you liked it.
So what year was that?
Well, Carl was in Denver. Ronnie would have to know that.
Yeah, he was in the Air Force.
Was he in Denver early on in his career?
Yeah,
It seems like he was.
that was the first. He went to San Antonio for basic training, and then he went.
Just over 50 years ago.
Yeah, I think he was in Denver 2-3 years,
I think so too.
counting the days.
So the girls seemed to feel that Louie pretty often went a little bit too far, and maybe he did. Louie got me in some hot water too while I was on my honeymoon. I'm going to tell you that story a little bit later. That one's coming. So when I got to college, I studied geophysics, so I couldn't keep my mouth shut when Louie started telling me about dowsing for water pipes. He said, you could use willow twigs, but bent welding rods work even better. And to prove it, he said he found the water lines that ran right into his house. Well, I could be quiet then. So I tried to tell Louis, whenever you're backfilling a trench, you can never get the ground level enough. And I also looked in his garden and I saw a streak where his vegetables weren't growing so good. And I said to Louis, that's where your water mains are buried. The good surface soil was never properly restored when they refilled the trench. So I got the last word on that. And if he was here, I wouldn't have the last word.
And he proved that it works.
Yeah, that's true. There's somebody who did it right there. Huh? And you know the village of Cedar Grove, after a while, had dividing rods on their trucks.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
They actually used it.
Well, they work for the reason I said. You know, either the trench is mounded up a little bit or it's sinking down a
But
little bit.
you could feel it.
Yeah.
You could feel it.
But it was actually in your toes. You thought it was in your hands.
Ask Betty, they worked well for her.
So one day I came by their place with my kids, and Louis said to my kids, it didn't hurt a thing being a little pigeon-toed. By Dixie, I got plenty of girls too, he said. And I even heard a story that I'm sure he can tell better than me, but in the end he was in some pain in the hospital, and I don't know how close to his deathbed he was, but he was still humoring the nurses. And maybe some of you can tell some of the things that he might have said at a time like that. But if you don't want to, that's okay. So I remember the TeRondes from Milwaukee, and I also remember the TeRondes in Oostburg. In Milwaukee, they had a Victrola. In my memory, there was only 2 records, and one of them I can still sing. Meet me in St. Louis, Louis, meet me at the fair. How many of you guys remember that record? Were there more than 2 records, Russ? That's the only one I remember.
And Ernest Sack. The soprano, the German soprano. Supposed to be the world's highest singer, and he listened to that thing for hours.
So I sure loved turning the crank on that Victrola, and then we went down the basement of their house, and they had a tricycle, and we went around that furnace about 100 times.
Jack,
Did we always go clockwise? In my memory, we've always went clockwise.
Jack, I want to tell you about our Victrola. We had one also, and we had a little ice pond. They call it Fuzzy's Pond. Ray, you probably right.
Oh, I remember.
And we'd take this Victrola and take it out in the middle of the pond and crank it up so we had music while we were skating.
Oh, wow.
But it got colder, and all of a sudden the music got slower and slower, and finally it stopped. That's as far as it got.
I forgot to mention that organ that the Mylinks had. What was it? I pedaled that one too. What was that?
We had a player.
Player,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Player,
That was
where you
a lot
had
of
a
fun.
pedal with your
That
feet.
was pretty amazing to see those keys going down themselves. So anyway, my memories from the TeRondes were stronger from Oostburg than from Milwaukee. And in the beginning, they had a little one-room shack in the woods. And this little one-room shack had a little teeny addition that was about 6 feet square. It had a children's bunk bed in it and maybe a little alleyway to get to the bunk bed. Just enough for kids. And my dear Aunt Helen invited me to join in this little paradise to play with Russ and Ray. 3 kids will fit in one bunk bed, you all know, feet to feet. And I think Russ got the top bunk and Ray and I had to get the bottom. Is that right? And there was no electricity there, and they didn't have a refrigerator, of course, and so they dug a hole in the ground, which was always pretty cool. And in the hole was a box where they put in milk, butter, and cheese. And a few years later, I have fabulous memories of the Morning Star Cottage, where I played principally with the Kreunens kids and with the TeRondes.
When Ruth and I got married, we stayed at a cottage across from the one you're talking about. In my memory, there's a road there, and this was not on the lake, but it was back of that.
It was Union Threads.
Whose cottage could that have been?
Union Threads.
Union Fred had it.
Okay. Yeah, we stayed there for maybe a week or 2 weeks.
Before we got an apartment.
Before we got an apartment.
Right
in
after
Cedar
we
Grove.
were married.
The Doc Dunk.
And I remember the table was pulled down from the
Yeah,
wall.
I
I thought that was the
remember that.
neatest thing I'd ever seen.
Well, thank you. Now I feel better. It was such a place.
Yep.
Well, particularly remember the upper story of the Morningstar Cottage, they had partitions instead of walls, and the kids would climb on the tops of those partitions and leap onto the bed. I see Russ grinning, I don't know how many other. Did you do that too, Ronnie, or is it just Russ? You don't remember that.
I'll tell you, I don't remember the partitions, but I remember being scared out of my mind by my wonderful older brothers who told me ghost stories and then led me up to the upper level, and there they had this moose head that they had covered with a sheet. And at just the right moment, they pulled off the sheet and I went screaming and yelling down the stairs. I was scared to ever go up those stairs again.
You didn't do that.
Warren,
Nice
you wouldn't
guys.
do that, would you?
I have no memory.
Selective is what it is. Yeah.
So many years later, Aunt Helen came to Pine Haven, so I sent her a letter thanking her for all my fine memories of sharing bunk beds with Russ and Ray, and for all the fun I had there. And then she sent me a nice picture of Russ and Ray and me at the Morningstar Cottage, and I know there's some of those kind of pictures are in your albums. Sadly, dear Aunt Helen passed on quickly before I had the opportunity to drive her here to the cottage and get more stories straight out of her, which would have been fun because she played with my mom so much. Now, the funniest story I have in a whole lot is about my mother, Nori, and she told me this about 6 years ago, which is about 5 years after my dad died. Before they were married, Nori opened a little beauty shop in Sheboygan Falls, and my dad worked in the Kohler factory. So then the economy declined in the Great Depression, and they laid off the single guys first, so there was my dad with no job. So, well, Nori hired him in the beauty shop. They never told me that before, and so that's how she got him. And she also had this to tell me. He was awfully good looking, and the best thing about it was, he didn't seem to know it. And then she went on to say, he couldn't cut hair very good, but the ladies didn't seem to mind him. You told me that was true, huh? Yeah, he knows how he cut hair.
He didn't cut very well. Did she tell you he didn't do very good?
Didn't brother Fritz work there too?
No, that's a little bit, they got the clothing store going.
Okay.
So right now there's some pictures pointing me up on the computer in there. Just there's about 4 or 5 of them. One's Jenny Ackerman on it, and one is my mother, and looks like she's in Chicago getting an award for dressing up women's hair.
It's from 1935 at a hairdresser exploration.
Exposition.
Really?
Exposition.
I just learned it this week. Last in the family was little Uni. Oh, still here. I gotta be careful what I say. I'll lower my voice a little. She was only 3 years old when Arthur was stricken. And maybe there's, I don't know if there's anybody here who doesn't know that story, but he became a cripple in the year of the, year 10 months. I thought you were 3. Okay. Okay, so he was a cripple after that. And I shouldn't probably repeat this, but Ev told me that Louis was too small to saddle a horse. So the girls did everything.
Did you know that he had his skull cracked by a horse's hoof right up above the eye?
No, I didn't know that. So he tried anyway.
He tried.
Was he really that small? I don't remember him being small.
Well, I certainly don't.
I don't know where he fit in either. Was he younger than Ev, or she's?
He's second.
He's second.
Ev
Ev is.
and then Louis.
Yep.
And then Louis.
Lyd was the oldest, right? And then Louis?
Lydia.
Yeah.
Is she the oldest of all?
Yes. And then Louis, and then Ev was behind, yeah, Nori.
I went through that too. I had it all messed up.
Now the back end of the Ackermann farm touched the corner of the back end of the Claerbout farm, where there were 5 boys, and I don't know what they were doing because my folks told me that there never was any connection between those 2 families. Everything that happened on Sauk Road was connected with the school up there, and what happened down on the Route 32 was the same story. That they knew your neighbors on your road, not behind. What? Oh, you did? Oh, well, I couldn't get that out of him, so you're telling me for the first time.
Well, Fritz and Fritz is about the same age as I.
Catherine was just a little older.
Okay, I still remember going to a family gathering that many of you were there on the farm of Minnie and Fred. The women were all in the kitchen and the men were all in the front yard smoking cigars. And the kids that were my age were all in the barn playing hideouts, making things out of hay bales, making little houses to throw inside, secret forts. A couple of years ago, Uni explained something about family life that I never knew. She told me this little rhyme, which I'm going to repeat now. A son is a son till he takes a wife. A daughter is a daughter all of your life. This little rhyme explains something that's been bothering me personally in my life, and I guess it explains some Ackermann history too. Anyway, here we are today, the Ackermann clan all gathered together, while I believe the Claerbout clan has not gathered since I left home 50 years ago. And we Claerbouts have no beautiful family portrait like the Ackermann family portrait that you all know. I believe you all have. The portrait, the picture of everybody, you know, all of the brothers, all of the sisters. So now I think I've covered all my aunties. Now I say a few words about Jenny and Arthur. Every Sunday we would drive to Cedar Grove and we'd visit some relative, either on my mom's side or my dad's side, and after that we would stop in just for a minute to see Jenny. That minute usually turned into supper. And she would cut the toasted cheese into tracks, and I would have tracks to eat. And the dessert would be sliced banana doused in orange juice. Anybody remember that?
Oh,
Sliced
yeah.
banana and orange juice. The radio would be turned on, and first would be Gabriel Heater, and after that would be Walter Winchell.
Did you have any elderberry wine?
I haven't gotten to that yet. And none of us is going to forget Grandma Ackermann's candy jar. Lorna even has a longer story about the candy jar.
Well, to me it was a metal cover in Kreunens when I moved in it. I can still hear the sound of that cover opening at the end of our visit. And then she'd pull the candies out and put in a little bag for you. So I tried to get some of those candies that I remembered in the kitchen. So once Mom and I went on an expedition, I wanted to hear that sound of that cupboard again. And she said that old cupboard was in the Sunday school room in the church in Sheboygan Falls. So we went down there looking, but it wasn't there anymore. So I still just have to remember that. But the other thing I remember is the smell of the grape soda. Grandma, occasionally for really special occasions, she had a little ledge in the basement and there was some grape soda. So all I have to do if I want to really get my memories back is just open a can of grape soda and take a whiff, and I'm right back down in the basement there.
I guess we all remember different things about Grandma's house. I remember the outhouse in the back, and I remember the creek there. We played quite a bit in the creek. It started out, there was a water pump on the outside, and we'd pump the water in a pail and bring the pail in the house, and then later on the water pumps were on the inside by the sink. We'd still be pumping the water, but the pump was at the sink. She always had 2 alarm clocks, and they would tick, and then they would be together for a while, then they'd be apart for a while. She had a sewing machine, and we were allowed to run the treadle by herself. And a washing machine, we could run that. I remember that as well. I must have been there a lot. And I had my first glass of wine there, which the wine that I remember is Mogan David Jewish Sacrament. I'm sure she had the other too, but
That was mixed with elderberry.
that was mixed with elderberry.
Right.
So, I have to tell you a Grandma Ackermann story that I remembered this story, and it puzzled me my whole life, and I've only figured it out this week, and I'm going to explain it to you. So she said something like this, and I picked this up. Why I picked it up, I don't know. But he said, these people came into the church. They picked up their hymnals, and then they jumped out the church window and ran away. What kind of a story is that? Huh? Well, I swear to it, that's what she said. And I'm going to come and tell you what I think the explanation is. But I've puzzled about it for years, and maybe some of you already know. Well, I'm going to tell the rest of that story, but I have to tell another story about Louis first. Because it all fits together, you know? So I married a Jewish lady, and I don't know if Louis knew she was Jewish or not. So we got married in Boston, and we were driving to California for my job. And Louis was sitting right in there on the sofa, and then he says something like this. He says, I don't know why I have to write 2 N's at the name of my name, Ackermann. Ackermann, I'm sure he said. So I got to leaving off the last N. Then one day, he figured, And then one day somebody said to Louis, you know, what's this only one in? That's the Yiddish way of spelling it. So that's what Louis is saying. This, my wife's right there. So Louis says, I figured I better put both ends on Ackerman. And then, it was Ivor in trouble with my wife, and that was on my honeymoon too.
I worked in a foundry one summer.
What Ron said.
Ron's going to say it for you.
Dad and I both worked one summer. Well, he worked there right along, but I just in summer.
Stand up and come a little closer.
Where did you work?
At Gilson Foundry in Port Washington. And in the office, after I had registered to work, he said, how come you spell your name with two N's and your dad only with one N? My dad explained it. He says, because he has more time than I do.
That sounds like him. Yeah.
Well, this is not the end of the Ackerman Inn story, because as the years went by, I tried to check up on the spelling of Ackerman. Was it really true that the Jewish Ackermans had only one end? I found out that seems to be true. That's not the end of the story either. A couple of years ago, we were digging around the cottage, and up came Norrie Ackerman's report card. Guess what? You won't guess. Jenny Ackerman had to sign that report card once a month. Now, I'm sorry we didn't dig it out for you, but would you believe that half of the time it had one end and the other half had two? That's the truth, and Janet, you can find it if they don't believe it. Huh? Even more surprising to me, which I just learned this last week, Janet dug up the annual report of the Calvary Presbyterian Church of 1941. Now, I was going to show that around, but I know right where it is in the cottage if you don't believe what I'm going to tell you next. Included in there is the envelope report. Now, you all know what that means? Hey, I can look and see how much each one of the Claerbout brothers gave the church that year. But the first name on the alphabetical list is Jenny Ackerman. How many N's? One. Oh, you know that. It's one N. So that's my way of thinking that Grandma Ackerman gave me permission in advance to marry a Jewish lady. That plus the Mogen David Jewish wine that she introduced me to. Now, I haven't said anything about my grandfather, Arturo Ackerman, who was German and surely knew the difference between one and two, as all Germans must, huh? He was gone before I was born. Ev told me that Jenny and Arthur were very knowledgeable in the ways of the world. They even got a special newspaper all the way from Madison, which they would discuss as a way to educate the whole family. Remember that or not?
Yeah,
that was earlier.
Yeah, but
Arturo wasn't talking when
they
you were-
discussed the politics. I don't think many women at that time had anything to do with politics, but they would, after the kids went to bed,
Grandma had Walter Winchell and Gabriel Heater all the time, so she knows something about it.
they knew a lot of stuff.
So here's the story of Arturo that I think I heard from Ed. One day Arturo got a letter in the mail from Germany, and this was a letter from the Kaiser himself. The Kaiser was of the opinion that Arturo should go back to Germany and help him fight World War I. And this was pretty disturbing news. So Arturo went to the county courthouse to ask if he really had to go back to Germany. And they said, no, your American citizenship application is far enough along. So he did not go back to Germany, and I'm sure that he and Jenny talked about Germany and Ackerman, and I do believe they talked about whether it's one N or two. So, well, there's one more story I'd like to tell, but it could get me in trouble, just like Louis got me in trouble with my wife. So I better read this one instead of winging it. And I'll hope for the best. I was one of Jenny's pallbearers, and who else was? You must have been, and Russ must have been, and Ray was one of them?
I was in Lydia. When we went from church to town. Yeah, Grandma. I'm sorry. No. I'm talking about your grandmother who lived on the street behind the garage. We were in church when they called her out, and I took her over to the house and we found her.
Well, Warren must have been
Probably Carl.
Oh, Carl. So I will not forget carrying her out of the Reformed church. Those were steep steps, and we don't have those steep steps any longer. We Claerbouts went to the Reformed church in Sheboygan Falls, but I kept hearing stories about the Presbyterian church in Cedar Grove. And it was always the North Side church that they talked about. Calvary Church is up on the hill, and that was built about the time my folks got married and they moved to Sheboygan Falls. So I kind of forgot about the church up on the hill, and I just thought about the two churches along the road to the cottage. So one day I stopped the car there on the north side church, and I found the back door was open, so I took my mom inside, and I was just disappointed because she didn't remember anything. And that was the beginning of the days her mind was starting to weaken, I guess. And then, so then the next year I stopped by there with Uni at the Northside Presbyterian Church, but then all the doors were locked, so we didn't get in. And so I didn't learn anything then. And I'm pretty sure Aunt Ev could have explained it all to me and would have known, but she didn't tell me. So I was trying to figure this out. Well, were our family Presbyterians or were they Reformed? I didn't know. And why did they choose? So when I was 13, 14 years old, I thought maybe I'll grow up to be a theologian, and I better figure out the answer to this one. So I never got the story straight until last week. I was reading some old newspaper clippings that were here in the cottage. Now, if you want to read some hot-headed remarks, you have to have a look at these clippings. Talking about this subject has split up more families, I believe, than the Polar Strike ever did. So that's why they didn't talk about it. And maybe I better shut up right now, I don't know. But my curiosity was aroused, and I was pleased that finally I figured it out. So I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to try to make this long story short, and I'll just explain it this way. If you start by asking a question whether there was kangaroos on Noah's Ark, a little while later you're going to be asking about the virgin birth, and I'm not going to go near that subject. Now what the newspaper says that the minister of the new church, the one up on the hill, was named Reverend DeWard. This one quotes him in the newspaper. It says, "While they ousted me from the old church, there are preachers preaching communism in the Milwaukee Presbytery." That's what he said. So you see, they really did live in interesting times. It just didn't seem that way to us kids. So there's some things you just don't explain to your kids. That's the only way I can explain it. So finally I knew the whole story. They went to the Northside Presbyterian Church until the New Orthodox Church was built on the top of the hill about when I was born. Then they switched to the new church up on the hill, the Calvary Presbyterian Church, and later on, Grandma's legs were kind of painful, and she switched to the Reformed Church because it wasn't such a long walk. So the last thing I have to say isn't very much. Uni told me that Louis used to write little stories up for these kind of gatherings, and he was too shy to read them, and so he'd get somebody else to read it.
Your mother.
And my mother would read it? Now, if anybody has these, I can make copies and spread them around. But
Yeah, I've got
that's
when
where
we
we are.
I know he did it for the 25th anniversary, I know for my parents and probably everybody.
Yeah.
And does anybody have any of those?
I brought mine along.
From
There's one from a 10th anniversary and one from a 25th.
Yeah.
If anybody wants this, you give me your email address, I can mail it to you. And I will give this to the Mylinks since there's the most of them. You want the paper? You want to spread it around.
It goes with the milk can.
Will you guys ask one of us to make copies and send
This
it
is
up?
by ours. Now, you take over, Jana. You have some things to show, or
No, Linda had some
Linda has things to show?
Well, this box is
If you
full
stand
of
up and-
Ackermann memorabilia, and some of you
You
have
leaving
seen it,
already?
some of you
Or you
haven't.
got somebody
There's
wants a
things
ride?
like old
No, Kyle's
Russian
riding back and forth. It's not
naturalization papers.
What?
There's
Kyle's.
German pictures in
Oh,
there.
he's over
So
there?
if anybody wants to look at that, they can.
And what did the barber say to you?
I don't know if he said, "Do you know Russ TeRondes?" or he said Russ TeRondes maybe was in. I said that's my wife's first cousin. So he got the 50th class reunion of the barber shop. That's the first time they met, 50 years.
And Russ can go on about that, but Dick started going with the barber he had always been going to, and here he and Russ had been classmates. And then when Dick went in there, he gave us all these pictures from Russ from 50 years ago in barber school. Can I have permission to pass them around?
They won't know anybody but me. Might
And
not.
since we're on the TeRondes note, when I was going through things at the cottage, I found nurses receive diplomas, and here is Aunt Helen on here.
And I'll give that to you, Russ. I don't know if you have a copy.
So I know just when you go to the log
Mount
cabin.
Sinai. I don't know if some of you would know any of these names.
Yeah, that's right.
Ranch
That's where we
Graves,
go every time. Every
The
time
Isle
bring
of
Uni up
Walters,
or whatever, we go.
Stella.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, I moved it from the other side.
Okay, one more. Oh, that's pretty good. What's the next bus? Claerbouts?
Well, can we get one with our spouses?
Well, I think the brother one. Ready? I always have Kevin say cheese in the mousetrap.
There you go. Now wait, one more. One more. Yeah, last year we had Jack.
Good, we got flash.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Later.
Okay.
Here we go. From here up. That's good.
Oh, yes.
Cheese.
It is 20.
Got it.
These are the cousins. Judy, Roy, Jana, Jack, Chrissy, Warren, Ronnie, Linda, Carol, Gwen, Ruth, Phyllis, and Lorna. The children of Jenny Ackerman, Phyllis Mylinks Stewart, Ruth Mylink Eckhoff, Carol Mylink Vaughn, and Judy Mylink Hoover. This is Roy Ackerman, Linda Ackerman Damcott, and Ronnie Ackerman. Warren Kreunen, Gwen Kreunen Wartalk. Jana Claerbout Sorens, Jack Claerbout, my real name is John. Lorna Claerbout. Norma Ackermann Claerbout, good old Nori. Here's Chrissy and Uni, Chris Tempas, Uni Tempas. Here's Russ TeRondes and his friend. His friend is Carol. Oh no, that's his wife, Carol, his wife. Phyllis and Bob Stewart, Ruth and Roy Eckhoff, Carol Vaughn, Judy and Dave Hoover. Roy and Mary Ackerman, Linda Damcott, Ron and Betty Ackerman. Warren Kreunen and friend, Gwen and Bob Wartalk. Well, Lorna, do you want to tell us what happened here last night?
No.
No? Come on, it was a nice time.
It was a nice time. Should I take a picture of you and you can say what happened?
After lunch but before dinner we had probably about half the whole party came down out to the water and was either
we had all these grannies out. We had all these grannies out in the lake
on inner tubes and kayak.
That was amazing. In fact, that these lots of ladies too went out in the lake. Huh?
Yeah,
more ladies than men were in the lake. So last night was a total surprise. We had all of our Ackerman relatives here at the cottage. I don't know all of them, but most of them. And so we had this big lunch and we took pictures and stuff like that. And then the party didn't stop. It continued on, and somebody, well, one of my cousins brought some bottles of wine, and so the hardcore was here at supper time, and there was one piece of meat for everybody and lots of veggies, and so then we had this bottle of wine, and things got more and more jolly, and I said, we're never going to get these old people down to the lake to have a bonfire, and much to my surprise, we got the bonfire going, and all these old people got out there. I'll say all these old people, my cousins, in other words. What was the youngest one present was about 50 maybe? Going from 50 to 75.
Well, how about Ross?
Oh, well, he's the son of a cousin.
Okay.
Yeah, there was also a daughter of another cousin who had dandelion eyes. So what happened? Then we sang, and we probably got 100 different songs that we were able to sing around the campfire, which is quite surprising. considering the age of the group. It was really very jolly, and we had a wonderful time. My mother and father had been alive and able to join this party. They would have been thrilled to have a party, and they'd be proud of the fact that we've gotten all these